أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم وصلى الله على محمد وآله الطيبين الطاهرين ولعنة الله على أعدائهم أجمعين إلى أبد الآبدين. السلام على الحسين وعلى علي بن الحسين وعلى أولاد الحسين وعلى أصحاب الحسين عليه جميعا ورحمة الله وبركاته. You're right. I mean, it was the last time we sat in this studio for this specific show was the night of Ashura, where we mourned the night of sorrows and the night of pain and the last night that brought Imam Hussein alayhi salam and brought Sayyidah Zainab and the rest of the family together for the final time. Of course, when you say there are those who by the end of the 10th of Muharram, they tend to wrap up everything, put it to one side and reopen that wrap just briefly before the holy month of Muharram, the day after. Whilst we keep reminding ourselves, reminding our dear brothers and sisters that the 10th of Ashura, the afternoon of the 10th of Ashura, is the start of the masa'ib of Ahlul Bayt alayhum as-salam. So we have prepared ourselves prior to that by 10 days of preparing yourself for the tragedy, the ultimate tragedy on the day of Ashura. And then from that day onwards, we have to be taking the steps with the caravan of the Asara and what that means for us in our daily lives. Which means that when Lady Zainab Salamullahi alayha and Imam Zainul Abidin and the rest of the Immaculate Bani Hashim, they continued the route and the path of Abi Abdullah al-Hussein, which is the path of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wasallam, and hence being the path of the other 123,000 prophets before the Holy Prophet of Islam, which is the path of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So we don't stop on the day of Ashura. Our faith and belief calls us and draws us to continue mourning, and through this mourning we learn, we better ourselves, we advance in our faith and in our religion. At the end, from Karbala, from the lessons of Ashura and from the lessons of the caravan of the captives and the Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam, whether it's in Kufa, whether it's what happens during the way to Sham, and whatever of tragedies that broke the heart of Sayyidah Zainab and broke and shattered the heart of Imam Zainul Abidin, and the lessons that we can derive from that, and then eventually coming back to Karbala very briefly, and then settling down in the holy city of Medina. So at the end of the day, when one Imam dies, in this case when Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam was tragically killed and martyred, and his body was separated, it's the start of the mourning of the next Imam. So we don't just stay in Karbala and we mourn Karbala and that's it, we stay with Imam al-Hussein in Karbala and we leave, God forbid, the Imam after him to go to Kufa and Sham by himself until next Muharram. No, we continue walking with Imam Zain al-Abidin. We continue learning from the sermons and the speeches of Lady Zainab and Imam Zain al-Abidin in Kufa and Sham.
Absolutely.
And we continue, inshallah, to implement these lessons from how they continued, not going back to their normal lives when they came back to Medina. So we copy that and we implement it in our lives.
So we will return to the masa'ib of Imam Sajjad, and specifically what you refer to is, from the 10th onwards, it's the tragedy of Sayyidah Zainab alayhi salam and Imam Sajjad to a certain, because he was still, as we know, he was very ill, but he was still dragged from city to city, although he was ill. We'll return to that. But after he returned to Medina, what was life like for Imam Sajjad alayhi salam?
Of course, leaving Karbala and going through that journey from Karbala to Kufa, from Kufa to Sham, and all the sorrows and pains that happened to them is one, and them coming back from Sham to Karbala is another, and from Karbala making their way to Medina, and what state they entered Medina is another. So when they arrived in Karbala on the 20th of Safar, and to some narrations they remained for 3 days, and then after 3 days, Imam Zayn al-Abidin, fearing for the life of his auntie Zainab salamullahi alayha, instructed the caravan to move back towards Medina. They arrived in Medina, according to history, the second day of Rabi' al-Awwal, the year 61 AH.
Okay.
So roughly 11 days or 12 days it took them to come back from Karbala to Medina. Now you might ask me, when Imam Hussein alayhi salam left Medina, went to Mecca, from Mecca went to Karbala, that took months. How could the family in that state make their own way towards Karbala, towards Medina, from Karbala in 11 or 12 days? I would say, first of all, this is a family which has been broken. This is a family that wants to go back and settle down, to start its mourning, because they weren't allowed to mourn, they weren't allowed to cry. So Imam Zayn al-Abidin has that responsibility of bringing back of whoever's left from the family of Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam safely to the city of Medina. So how does Imam Zayn al-Abidin enter? Inshallah we will mention in the Masa'ib. But Imam Zayn al-Abidin, now, from one aspect, he is coming back to the followers of his father Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam, basically the Shia. And not only the Shia were in the city of Medina, there were those who were of different denominations, different affiliations. They followed, for example, the Uthmani sect, they followed the Marwani sect, they followed the Bani Umayyah. So they weren't in agreement with the movement of Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam. So Imam Zayn al-Abidin here was in a kind of a secret, very dim movement to slowly regenerate that which is being suffered by the Ummah, which is to bring them back to the teachings of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wasallam. So here we find that Imam Zayn al-Abidin salawatullahi wa salamu alayhi, very calmly, very quietly, very subtly, although there are different movements happening here and there during the stay of Imam Zayn al-Abidin in the city of Medina, like revolutions, like political movements between the Umayyads and the Abbasis and the Marwanis, they're all fighting against each other, wanting to get a piece of that cake. And the unrest in the Umayyad dynasty, in the Umayyad family after the events of Karbala. So Imam Zayn al-Abidin here starts to divide his time for being able to continue his work as an Imam. So one of the ways that Imam Zayn al-Abidin salawatullah alayhi was able to reintroduce the values of Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam, in that very electrified atmosphere in the city of Medina, with eyes, spies watching over this family and the whole city of Medina, was through organizing classes.
Right.
For example, if we go back to the books of history and Tariq, we find that Imam Zayn al-Abidin had Quran tafsir lessons and circles. Az-Zuhri is one of the scholars, one of the well-known scholars of the city of Medina, who wasn't in the line of Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam. And he, in the books of history, it's narrated that he comes to speak highly about the knowledge of Imam Zayn al-Abidin, at least in the areas of the exegesis and the tafsir of the Holy Quran, where he says, I, Zuhri, used to benefit from the tafsir of Imam Zayn al-Abidin to the Holy Quran. So Imam Zayn al-Abidin in the city of Medina, in the mosque, has tafsir circles and classes. Other than that, Imam Zayn al-Abidin also started through the concept of paying for servants and slaves He used to go to the market, buy. In those days, there were servants or slaves being bought and sold.
Yeah.
So he used to buy those individuals, bring them to his house, to his home, provide the life necessities, and also educate them. And Imam Zayn al-Abidin did not keep them for a whole year. It is narrated that every Eid al-Fitr,
Yeah.
Imam Zayn al-Abidin will come to them, will tell them, today is the day of Eid. You've stayed with me, you have been educated. Now I want to give you one gift on this day, which is you are free to go.
Subhanallah.
But I have one condition. And that condition is that wherever you go to settle down, I want you to share this knowledge that you have received from me to other people.
Subhanallah.
So this was one of the networks that Imam Zayn al-Abidin, through which he established the reintroduction or introducing the knowledge of Ahlul Bayt towards the Muslims and amongst the Muslims.
So he wanted to, I guess, take advantage of the fact that there was political turmoil going on. The Abbasids were like, oh, look, Imam Hussein was killed, and let's do a revolution in the name of Imam Hussein because he's part of our bloodline.
No.
And the Umayyads were still, there was revolution after revolution coming on. So he said, you know what, let's leave that to them and let me focus on actually implementing Imam Hussein's plan, and that's to resurrect the teachings of the Ahlul Bayt and resurrect the teachings of the Prophet, which is the Quran and the Ahlul Bayt. And so that's exactly according to...
Because the Umayyads, one of the things that, or the main thing that they were doing to pave the way for the events of Karbala and what happened in Ashura, and what they gave as an excuse, is that in 80 years after the death of Amir al-Mu'minin Ali ibn Abi Talib, they tried to take away this concept of religiosity and Salah and Quran from this holy household. That's why Amir al-Mu'minin Ali ibn Abi Talib, when he was killed in the mihrab, people of Sham were questioning what was he doing in the masjid.
Subhanallah.
Because they were being told by the Umayyad media that he doesn't pray, he doesn't have anything to do with Salah. He is a Khariji, he is someone who's gone out against the Khalifa and the Imam of his time, so-called the Imam of his time. The same thing was played and practiced against Imam Hussein alayhi salam, as he is, God forbid, someone who has gone against the leader and the leader of his time. So he doesn't have anything to do with Quran, and he doesn't have anything to do with Rasulullah, he doesn't have anything to do with Salah.
Right.
Here, this was one of the ways for Imam Zayn al-Abidin to reintroduce this to people. Say, people, that's why in his sermons in Kufa, in Sham, Imam alayhi salam, how did he introduce himself? One of the ways that he introduced himself, he used to say, Ana ibn Makkah. And everyone knows where Mecca is, and where and what position Mecca holds in the house of Muslims. Ana ibn Makkah wa Mina. Ana ibn Zamzam wa Safa. Ana ibn man hamala zakat bi atraf al-rada. I am the son of the one that placed Hajar al-Aswad. I am the son of that grandfather, and I am the son of that Prophet of Allah that you became Muslims as a result of. So this was the second. The first being the Quran tafsir classes. The second being buying and freeing the slaves and teaching them, educating them. The third being the continuous, the creation of this atmosphere in the city of Medina of supplication, of salah, of ibadah. Because some come and say, Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam, he rose militarily, he went to Karbala, he stood on the plains of Karbala and he fought. Now revolutions happened at the time of Imam Zayn al-Abidin. They came to attack Medina. The very famous event of Harra, 3 years after Karbala, when Yazid ibn Muawiyah alayhi la'inullah, when he ordered his army to go and do whatever they please in the city of Medina, Imam Zayn al-Abidin, where was he? He was in Medina. So some come and question that, what was the role of Imam Zayn al-Abidin in that? Why didn't Imam Zayn al-Abidin rise like his father, Abi Abdullah al-Hussein? Imam Zayn al-Abidin, and this is one thing that we need to understand, not only Imam Zayn al-Abidin, after Imam Zayn al-Abidin, Imam al-Baqir, Imam al-Sadiq, Imam Musa ibn Ja'far, and the rest of the Imams, where they used to be asked, Ya ibn Rasulillah, why don't you rise against this oppressor of your time? The Imam alayhi salam used to answer the answer of Ali ibn Abi Talib. If I only had the honest, sincere companions around me, then that hujjah, that excuse would fall. And I have to practice. But Imam Zayn al-Abidin in Medina, he knew he didn't have any support. The people of Medina did not have any support. They were weak in terms of military. That's why the army of Sham was able to do whatever they wanted to do in those 3 days that they attacked the city of Medina. In the event of where they call it Istabah al-Medina. He told his army, the army of Sham, the city of Medina is mubah.
Subhanallah.
There are no boundaries, there are no limits. Do whatever you want.
Wow.
Why? Because there were individuals from Medina, the companions, that went to Sham and saw and noticed the state of the government, the state of the head of the government. He was a drunkard, he was playing with animals, he was doing lahwan la'ib, he was enjoying himself, he was getting into relationships with his relatives, ancestry. So here, they came back to Medina and they said, by Allah, we will not remain under the oath of and the allegiance of the government of Sham. So they revolted, and as a result, Imam Zayn al-Abidin was asked, why didn't you help and support? Imam Zayn al-Abidin told him, listen, I've just come out from a war, a battle, where 90% of my family was annihilated.
SubhanAllah.
If I had known there were people to support me and I will be victorious in defending the city, the grave and the burial site of my grandfather Rasulullah, I would have done so. But I know things are not done like that. And Imam Zayn al-Abidin had the responsibility to look after the remainder of Ahlul Bayt alayhim as-salam. So here Imam Zayn al-Abidin was occupied and busy with ibadah. That's why he is called Zaynul Abidin.
Yeah.
And Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wasallam, from before the birth of Imam Zayn al-Abidin, he gave the glad tidings of the birth of Imam Zayn al-Abidin to Jabir ibn Abdullah al-Ansari. He was sitting one day next to Rasulullah. Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa alihi says, oh Jabir, you see the son that is in my lap? I mean, referring to Imam Hussein alayhi salam. He will have a son by the name of Ali, who will be known as Zaynul Abidin.
SubhanAllah.
You will meet him and you will meet his son, Muhammad ibn Ali. And if you do, send him, carry my salams and salutations to him. So Rasulullah gave the glad tidings that this is the master of the Abidin, the worshippers. And here there are many narrations. But the ibadah, the extent of the ibadah of Imam Zayn al-Abidin, when he was getting ready for salah, doing wudu and ablution, they used to notice that the color of the face of the Imam would change. They would ask him, Ya ibn Rasulillah, why do we see you in that state? You are getting ready to go to salah. Imam Zayn al-Abidin salatullah alayhi used to say, do you know who I am going to stand before? Now, if we take those lessons of Imam Zayn al-Abidin, if I speak to myself, in what state do I get ready to go to salah? First of all, do I pray on time? Do I keep salah in my mind? Before the time of salah, I go and prepare myself. I reflect on my actions during the day and in what kind of a condition do I go and stand before Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and how do I have the audacity to go and stand before Allah knowing that I have committed all of these sins and mistakes during the day. And I keep doing that. So Imam Zayn al-Abidin was referring to, oh people, the whole concept of salah, inna salata tanha anil fahsha'i wal munkar. So this was one of the ways, through ibadah, through salah. The servants and the maids, they narrate to us, they describe to us the condition of Imam Zayn al-Abidin. That every time that ما قدمنا له طعاما في نهار. during the life of Imam Zain al-Abidin, when he came back to Medina, we did not give or place a plate of food in front of the Imam during the day, which means that the Imam was busy fasting. كان صائما نهارا قائما ليلا.
Subhanallah.
They used to come and say to Imam Zain al-Abidin, Ibn Rasulullah, we see you engage in salah and ibadah. Is it not time for you to rest? And the same maid and the same servant said, I did not place a plate of food in front of him during the day. وَلَمْ أَحُطْ لَهُ فِرَاشًا فِي لَيْلٍ. At night I did not prepare his place for him to rest. So why don't you rest, Ibn Rasulullah? You are weak, you are pale, you don't eat, you don't drink. Imam Zain al-Abidin salawatullahi wa salamu alayhi says, if you say this about my ibadah, then what would you say about the ibadah of my grandfather, Ali ibn Abi Talib? I am nothing compared to Ali ibn Abi Talib.
Yeah.
Mullah Ali, unfortunately, when we bring the name of Imam Zain al-Abidin, as soon as you ask someone, who is Imam Sajjad, the only thing that they remember of Imam Zain al-Abidin is how he was in Karbala and he was ill and they took him as a captive, and that's everything finishes in the boundaries of Karbala and Ashura. While that is not the case, that shouldn't be the case. I know Karbala and Ashura is a heavy tragedy and will continue leaving its sorrowful marks on the life of the Shia. But it doesn't mean that we don't educate ourselves on the lives of the Ma'soomeen.
Yeah.
There are many things we can learn about Imam Zain al-Abidin when he came back to Medina.
Yeah.
One of the other ways, and tell me if you want to move on.
Yeah. Just a couple of minutes.
One of the other ways is that he introduced the aqa'id of Ahlul Bayt, the belief of Ahlul Bayt, salawatullah wa salamu alayhim. Because Bani Umayyah, they changed the look of Islam. Their intention was to bury the mention of Islam and anything that related to Islam. So belief, tawheed, adl, aqa'id, anything to do with Allah, to do with Rasulullah, to do with Ahlul Bayt, to do with the Quran, they didn't want to have. So Imam Zain al-Abidin salawatullahi wa salamu alayhi was able to do that through introducing 54 supplications. Through these supplications, he introduced in different areas of aqa'id, belief, and wilayah.
Okay.
If I encourage my brothers and sisters, go and read As-Sahifa As-Sajjadiyya. And why is it called As-Sahifa As-Sajjadiyya? One of the names of As-Sahifa As-Sajjadiyya is Zabur Al Muhammad, the Psalms of the Al Muhammad, or Injilu Ahlul Bayt, the Bible of Ahlul Bayt. Now, why would they give that name? Or Ukhtul Quran.
Wow.
One of the names of As-Sahifa As-Sajjadiyya is called the sister of the Quran. Now, why would they give these names to a book of dua, a book of supplication? And when we say supplication, the first thing that comes to my mind is that supplication, dua, is something that is between me and my Lord. I want to speak to Allah, I recite the dua. But there are different categories of you speaking to Allah about.
Yeah.
About your belief in Allah, about your belief in Akhirah, about your belief in Allah's sustenance. So Imam Zain al-Abidin in 54 different du'as and supplications through Injilu Ali Muhammad or Zaburu Ali Muhammad. After Karbala, there was no mention of the real values of the Quran. So Imam Zain al-Abidin tried to introduce the values of the Quran and the values of the belief
through dua,
through As-Sahifa As-Sajjadiyya. That was fiqh and aqa'id wise. Now through another works of Imam Zain al-Abidin, which is the Treatise of Rights, and which is you alluded to, is Risalat al-Huquq. He did not only want people to become religious and only spend time praying to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because people had lost their societal values.
Yeah.
Banu Umayyah, they ruined everything.
Yeah.
They took away religion, and with religion they took away how people related to each other.
Subhanallah.
So Imam Zain al-Abidin, again, he introduced salah and ibadah, And through that he introduced treaties of rights.
Imam Sajjad had probably a massive role, because Imam Hussein ﷺ sacrificed himself to tell the ummah something shocking needs to happen for everyone to wake up. Okay, but now that he's gone, someone needed to do the work. And the work was carried out by Imam Sajjad, as he mentioned.
Yes.
But not only is he known for the supplications and the du'as and how God conscious he was, but then he also introduced the rights of people, so that people within society can live amongst each other knowing.
Let me make it easier for our dear brothers and sisters and for ourselves. The way I look at Imam Zayn al-Abidin and that 35 years of his imamah is that I compare him to the works of Rasulullah at the early stages of establishing, say, the foundations of Islam.
Yeah.
Because Imam Zayn al-Abidin, literally, after Karbala, they asked him, after Karbala, how many Shi'as did you have? How many followers of Ahlul Bayt did you have? Imam Zayn al-Abidin said, only a few numbers. The numbers of the fingers on your hand. So basically, nothing remained of Ahlul Bayt, of the remembrance of Ahlul Bayt. So Imam Zayn al-Abidin had to come back using the sacrifice of Imam Hussein alayhi salam to set the standards and the foundations and establish and restart rebuilding that building of Islam. And he done that because militarily he can't do anything. Because Banu Umayyah came with the slogan, كل يوم عاشوراء كل أرض كربلاء. We will turn every place into Karbala and every day into Ashura. But that still did not stop the revolts and the revolutions and the movements against Banu Umayyah. But Imam Zayn al-Abidin decided, I think the best thing for me to do is to revive the teachings of Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam through this quiet method, which was through Sahifa Sajjadiyya, teaching, educating people to be carriers of this ulum, this science. I will educate a group of people on spreading the rights of people amongst each other.
Yeah.
And also he encouraged people to sit down and spread the oppression and the madlumi of Imam al-Hussein.
There's a lot.
Yeah,
there's a lot that we can speak about Imam Sajjad, and of course it needs not just an hour show, but hours and hours of shows. I'm sure we can find a lot of information about Imam Sajjad.